Greetings and salutations, everybody. Here is another threequel to go with the one that I did for Halloween 3 last week. I will link to that at the end if you haven't had a chance to see that, so stick around for that. As this video is going to be for Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors from 1987. The last time I saw this one was a little ways back. I did some videos for the franchise as a whole, like a couple of years ago, when I kind of revisited all of them and made a video for each one. I do have a supercut of all that put together, so I will link to that as well at the end, so be sure to stick around and check out what I thought of these years ago as I was going through them in such a short time frame. But, I wanted to do a revisit of this installment, Part 3 in particular, as not only had it been a few years since I'd seen it, but I always enjoyed this one and would often think, do I actually end up liking this one better than the original? One of my mutant friends, a Terrorific lady, she said pretty much just the same thing in one of her videos, that it kind of edges out the original, And quick sidebar about Brandy, our Terrorific lady. While my videos are more of a general, I like this for these reasons, maybe you will too. Hers are much more in-depth, and she does this much deeper dive into content. That's why she uses terms like school and class and so forth, so definitely check out some info about her in my description. I'll have a link to one of her videos about ranking Nightmare on Elm Street. Anyways, back to this one. I do have this issue though lately where whenever I think about revisiting part of a series or a franchise, I often end up thinking that I need to revisit everything that led up to it. So I end up putting it off for the sake of trying to do a binge of the entire franchise one day. I don't know if anybody else ever comes across that and feels the same way, but seeing as recently I did jump right into a few titles that were part of their franchise later on, instead of starting at the beginning, which were for Friday the 13th Parts 6 and 7, as well as Sleepaway Camp 2. I enjoyed that quicker, just getting to the specific title that I had in mind. And I was having a bad day last Saturday, and I figured some horror therapy was in order, and I decided just to skip right to Part 3, and to see, not only, to confirm it's one of my favorites, but am I starting to think of it as my favorite in general, even better than the original. So, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors from 1987, starring Patricia Arquette, Heather Langenkamp, and of course Robert Englund. We also have one of the early roles of Lawrence Fishburne in this. But as usual, for those who are either unfamiliar or it's been such a long time, you need kind of a refresher, here is the synopsis. A psychiatrist familiar with the knife-wielding dream demon Freddy Krueger helps teens at a mental hospital battle the killer who is invading their dreams. Teens, plural. Where Part 1 focused mostly just on Nancy as a central character, quickly killing off a lot of those other characters, and the second one focusing mainly on Jesse. This one, it opened up much more with there being this group of teens. And sure, Arquette's character is, her character Kristen is like the central character, but I feel like there's so much more of that mixed in with there being 6 other teens in this group. But yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I've been liking this one, is that we just get more with it. It's like just more is put into this. But anyways, this one kind of skips over Part 2 in that it mainly focuses on just being a sequel to the first one. Taking place a few years after Part 1, Kristen is having these strange nightmares, so she's trying to keep herself awake with some crafting and some loud music and Diet Coke with instant coffee. Something about that scene has just always stuck in my brain. But in an interesting note, we see at the beginning is that with this crafting, it involves, part of it is her building this house that she's seen in her dreams, in these nightmares, which turns out later to be Nancy's house. So we have this connection already letting us know. But she keeps nodding off, and eventually when she does go to sleep, she has these dreams, runs across Freddy, and when she wakes, Freddy, the way that he got a hold of her in the dream, presented in the real life like she had made an attempt on her own life. And because of that, she ends up institutionalized to find out what's happening with these dreams and why she tried to kill herself. And that's where all these other kids come in. Each one having had similar issues, similar stresses trying to deal with these nightmares, not wanting to go to sleep. And they all cope in different ways or have other effects. So, one of them turned to drugs, one of them burns herself with cigarettes to try to stay awake so she can just stay up a little bit longer. One ended up taking a jump to try to end his life and ended up just breaking his legs and part of his back, so now he's just in a wheelchair. Everybody has issues, but they have this counseling to help them at this center. For the most part, through this Dr. Gordon character, it's pretty positive. He wants them to talk, discuss what's going on, and really try to help them get through it. there still is a pharmaceutical side of this, but in general, it's a pretty gentle approach to try to help them out in some ways. But, shortly after Kristen arrives, she has this breakdown when they're trying to sedate her. That's where Nancy arrives as well, as this grad student who was kind of being seen as up and coming in her field regarding dreams, which is definitely a suitable career after what she dealt with in the first film. But with Nancy there, they get to really dive into things, which, of course brings to light the fact that they have this similarity that they share. It's a man with a striped sweater, razor blades on his hand, and so forth. So not only are these kids going to be taken a lot more seriously, rather than just shoving their bad dreams aside or over-medicating them, they have somebody who is specifically familiar with their exact situation. Now, throughout the story, as they investigate, they learn to control their dreams a bit more and discover that some of them have like these powers in Dreamland, such as strength or magical powers or gymnastics abilities. Or probably the most memorable one is simply being a badass. But also that Kristen has the ability to pull others into her dream, something which they can use to their advantage as they decide to confront Freddy later on. So we go from just general worry about these kids to discovering the similarities, learning how to control the dreams, about them having these powers, to confront and hopefully take down Freddy once and for all, as the doctor has also been investigating just who this Krueger was. He's been looking into the history, tracking down information, speaking with this nun who has been kind of filling him in on information about Krueger's mother and how he kind of came to be. Opening things up even more to just learn about him was really a great touch that they did in this one. We have this reveal about how Krueger was conceived and indicating kind of why he ended up so horrible, being this child killer. But through that investigation, we also have this idea that they can hopefully stop him for good, finding out how to finally put his twisted soul to rest with the help of not just that nun who's been kind of filling in our doctor, like I said, but also enlisting the help of Nancy's father, who's become quite a detached and depressed drunk after the events of the first film. Now, I think the reason why, after just going through all that, the reason why this film always stands out to me is one to always come back to, and why I'd been teetering on that idea that perhaps it is my favorite even over the original, is that although that first one rocks, it's a great film, and of course it's the introduction for this entire idea, as well as Nancy and her father and Freddy and so on, the one which started it all. Part 3 simply has more. It has more going on in it. Not in a different way like 4, 5, and 6, but more like the way that Part 1 was. Like what Part 1 could have been if Nancy's friends hadn't been taken out so early. If there was a little bit more of a group effort going on there. So aside from just getting more characters, we have them longer, we have the shared Freddy experiences, we have the powers from the dreams, they get actual help from the doctor and Nancy as our adults in this, and we just have more creepiness and horror as well. Horror and scares. Because while I do like the other films, from Part 4 onward, they really seem to lean into the comedy as well. People liked Freddy by that point. They wanted to see those like quips and puns, and that's what the focus kind of turned into. What's he going to do or say? What's a silly situation going to be? Now, he still has some of those quips and puns in this one, memorable ones even, but it seemed like on this last viewing, he didn't really cross that line of humor too far until maybe when he starts taking out some of the kids toward closer to the end of the film. The Hall of Mirrors kind of sticks out to me, where it was either just funny enough or of a quote, or that it had just gone on long enough that it kind of finally was setting the stage that this is where we're going to go with this. We're going to add more humor. Now, it kind of reminds me in a way of the last 20 minutes of Evil Dead 2. It got very slapstick, so naturally that's what Army of Darkness built from. They worked in that humor and that camp. This Elm Street installment seemed to be the last and biggest of the scary Freddy before we got the funny borderline hero Freddy in some ways, where you want to see the kill and hear the pun. Like I've said, I have to like the characters and, not want them to be killed to make it scary, but also I need to really hate the antagonist and what they're doing to kind of be afraid of them. When the humor comes on a little bit too strong and I'm not prepared for it, or it set the precedent before that it didn't used to be that funny, and the characters seem like horror fodder in a way, it kind of loses the scares for me. And it's fine, to have some fun with horror. I love Army of Darkness, you know, where the horror is so light it feels more like an adventure film and comedy than any kind of horror. Or Killer Clowns, not scary in the slightest, but just some silly fun. Or my wedding video, which really mixes the horror of the situation with the hilarity of how short that marriage was. Anyways, no more about that. But sometimes I just want a little bit more horror in my horror film, you know, more scares, which is why I would often revisit the first Elm Street, which had barely any humor thrown in, just maybe a little bit from the male characters in it. And A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 seemed to still bring the horror and slowly work in the humor, which would be ramped up in the later installments in a way which for this installment was really well balanced and more than worth checking out. And speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out my latest video here for Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 Dream Warriors, which at the time of this video for some reason is only available on paid rental, but seeing as it's a new line, it may pop up on HBO Max again soon. I think it was actually there for quite a bit. They had pretty much all of the installments, but that's all the more reason to justify collecting stuff on physical media. I do think that the size of this story for Part 3, you know, what they added to it while still keeping the horror not quite as much humor as the later titles, may often have this one kind of win out over the first one, you know, even with the nostalgia factor taken into account. But what are your thoughts for this installment? Does it edge out the original for you? Do you prefer the comedy, which came kind of later in 4, 5, and 6? You know, go ahead and sound off in those comments. Hey, even bring up that remake and Freddy vs. Jason if you want to add those into the conversation. Anyways, that's all I've got for this one. Thanks for coming by and sticking around to the end. If you enjoyed, please give me a thumbs up. And if not already subscribed, consider subscribing and watching all of my content from beginning to end on loop for as long as possible. Yeah, anyways, got some other links coming up soon. Thanks again for coming by, and I will see you in the next one.